How to Make a Movie, Part 1, South by Southwest, 2024. It was a seasonally appropriate spring day in Austin, Texas, which is incredibly uncommon. Cool enough to comfortably ride my bike to the Zach Theater, and warm enough to do so in a t-shirt and stylish, airy pants from Japan. My friends Clint Bentley and Greg Queter were set to screen their third film together, Sing Sing, as its official Texas and I believe US premiere. The film had its world premiere in September 2023 at Toronto International Film Festival, where it was bought by A24 and quickly heralded as a triumph for Greg, the director, and Clint, the co-writer and producer. I had no official festival access nor friends and family ticket from either Clint or Greg. Nonetheless, I arrived as the red carpet began and confidently made my way past a line of ardent cinema goers, noticed only by the press who may have been thinking I was associated with the film. This is at least the narrative I've told myself my entire life, as eyes have perpetually danced toward me just long enough to imagine I was a man of importance or of status. I continue to actionize this imagination as I cruise past security and into the Zach Theater. No credentials around my neck, but enthusiastic smirk on my face as I exchange quick glances with Clint and Greg. The theater filled quickly, full of filmmakers yet to realize their potential like Clint and Greg would do this evening. I knew most of them from various forgettable projects in Dallas and Austin. All of us were ecstatic for our deserving friends, two of the kindest in the Texas-based industry. Beneath my exterior cheerleading was a familiar feeling and an obtrusive, consistent thought. Why wasn't this me? It's called envy. I have no right to be envious. I've spent most of my adult life building businesses, designing brands, and creating content for advertising, none of which is filmmaking. Yet my sense of entitlement is a character flaw, and one that never fails to lead me to death by comparison. And my comparisons on this particular evening consisted through every frame of my friend's magnificent film. It's ironic to suffer through my own self-pity during a film about the lifting up of others. Nonetheless, the picture was beautiful, and the night belonged to Clint and Greg, as it should, eventually resulting in an Oscar nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay. I stood for the applause and exited shortly thereafter, skipping the after-parties in favor of a long and lonely ride home. I purposely missed turns and redefined the scenic route. The wheels of my bike were turning, but my head was stuck on the decisions I made in life to leave me in the seats rather than on the stage. The loneliness and self-reflection continued throughout the evening, as a single cricket's chirp provided a metronomic soundtrack to another sleepless night. I considered my death, and however it were to come tomorrow, I would die before completing my most consistent obsession, making a film. Reflecting on your mortality is quite the wake-up call, but when practiced more frequently, it becomes a useful tool for motivation and, more importantly, discipline. I only held myself responsible for the need to ruminate on my death, and if I did eventually fall asleep that evening, I woke up with an unrelenting desire to write. A feeling so infrequent that when it comes, I must sit and bleed until everything inside of me has poured onto the page. This is also known as Draft 1. There's a collection of almost finished notebooks in my home. The pages of each are dated, some far back as 2012 and others more recent. They have two rather telling things in common. Each one is filled with film ideas that were never brought to fruition, and each one ends before the pages run out. There are fully thought out story treatments for The Texas Two. Two brothers in 1967 Texas grow a celebrity-like following from haphazardly robbing banks. Sixes and Sevens, a troubled young man inherits his father's estranged ranch. For what it's worth, when the city's most illustrious male escort retires, an inexperienced newcomer competes with his more accomplished colleagues for the right to service a coveted clientele. The Art of Storytelling, a struggling screenwriter avoids jail time by volunteering at a facility for dementia patients, where he meets the world's greatest storyteller. I borrowed from each to begin drafting a story that struck me as soon as I sat down to write. I kept my notebook nearby, but mostly wrote the screenplay from what felt like a memory. I wrote every day for 6 or 7 days, only breaking to eat and exercise. This style of determination, discipline, and flow state is rare for me and extremely difficult to come by. I often suffer through the aforementioned self-pity and anxiety to finish my work. It's a vicious cycle riddled with distractions and fear that results in less than special outcomes for the work created. Somehow the work pleases those that I created it for, consumers and clients, and thus keeps me alive long enough to fall back onto this style of initiative completion. In the times of my life where I've been able to accomplish an unrelenting, distractionless sense of purpose and accomplishment, it's been related to writing and filmmaking. In those 6 or 7 days in mid-March, it was no different. The result was Guero, a failed businessman returns to his estranged family's border ranch to fight the government's claim of eminent domain. Inspired by my friend's ability to labor through uncertainty and rejection to create life-affirming cinema, and the single cricket that stayed awake with me that evening, I finished the first draft of Guero by borrowing from dozens of unfinished films and imagining each description and piece of dialogue in my head, then relentlessly writing what I envisioned. And this is how I bleed. Guero is a term of endearment used by Mexicans for blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. In the film, our main character, C.W. Kendall, is blonde-haired and blue-eyed. However, the title of the film is in reference to a horse C.W. grew up with on the family's ranch, the Days of Heaven Ranch. The horse is blonde-colored, with blonde-haired, and used as a lighthouse for passing illegals, representing safety and friendship on these lands. Shortly after finishing the first draft of Guero, I returned to my purposeless self, haunted by my potential, but too anxious and fearful to do anything about it. This continued for weeks, until I was able to pull myself from the depth of my own hell and start on a second draft. Again, the writing came easy. Within 10 days, I had a draft 2, polished, more comprehensive, and more filmic. I shotgun shared draft 2 with my friends, or anyone in my notebook who makes films, incredibly eager for feedback and affirmation for my ability to craft something compelling. Then I waited, or at least I tried to, because I wasn't patient, but I was insistent, and with likely annoying follow-ups. The feedback would come, but I couldn't wait around for it. At the end of March 2024, one of my employees and I left for West Texas and the ranch that partially inspired the one depicted in Guero, 40,000 acres south of Marfa and north of Presidio, the gateway to the Chani Mountains. Ziege Friedrich, a friend of mine, and the son of Felipe de Mendel and Heinrich Friedrich, grew up between Yonkers, New York, and this ranch in the oceanic lands of West Texas. His parents are revenant collectors of art, having founded DIA in 1973 to commemorate their long-standing financial support of art projects around the world. Felipa is the daughter of French-American art collectors and philanthropists Dominique de Mendel and John de Mendel, the founders of the Mendel Collection in Houston and the International Foundation of Art Research. Felipa and Heiner had a patron and financier relationship with Donald Judd in the 1970s, which included their purchasing of a former military base for Judd to create a permanent space for the installation of his large mineral sculptures. As Judd purchased barren lands in West Texas, the Friedrichs did the same, eventually amassing 40,000 acres of Mexico front property and the gateway to the Chenani Mountains. Prior to writing Guero, I'd sit with Aziz for hours at his picturesque, Judd-influenced home in Spanish Oaks, Austin, Texas, as he told me stories about life on the Mesquite Ranch, growing up inches from the Texas-Mexico border, witnessing hundreds of illegals crossings, and coming face-to-face with desperate, kind, and hopeful immigrants. In 1996, the New York Times published an article depicting the Friedrichs' gifting of their 62 square miles of canyons, bluffs, and woodland plateaus to the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department in what is by far the largest land gift to the state. The gift included an endowment by the Friedrichs to maintain the land and offset the county's loss in property tax revenue. The Friedrichs continued to own 1,000 or so acres of the Mesquite Ranch, the other 39,000 only reachable by way of their private land. From Aziz's stories in the New York Times article, I created the setting and premise for my film Guero, and I visited in late March and early April to photograph the culturally and geographically significant lands. This was for my own knowledge, to experience the grounds and the energy, as much it was to put together a visual presentation for those that would be involved in the film: financiers, actors, producers, and the art department. While amongst the great West Texas sky on the Mesquite Ranch, I perfectly visualized the haunting nature and photographic style of Guero, a film I intended to capture like a David Lynch nightmare, with beguiling uses of the sun and the emptiness of the desert atmosphere. Upon returning back east, I immediately went to work on getting the film made, although I hadn't even had the slightest idea on how to do so. A month later, in early May, a large-scale commercial production that I was directing and my company Ceremony was producing was canceled without enough time to properly wind down the production work performed, including the hiring of crew and solidifying of locations. When this happens, the client is required to pay a kill fee, typically a percentage between 10 to 20% of the production budget. The client on this project affably agreed to pay a 15% kill fee, and I kept our crew and locations, having devised a plan to shoot a short film in the slot of the commercial's original production dates. Days prior, I had written an offbeat, cinematic comedy reflecting the stranger-than-fiction, real-life situation I was experiencing with my latest e-commerce endeavor, Dose, tallow fried potato chips. I wrote the dialogue one morning at my desk and never touched the script again, believing it was simply an exercise in creativity. When the commercial production was canceled, I thought immediately to make this short and practice the art of filmmaking, a warm-up, perhaps, to the making of a much larger project with Guero. The dialogue was shot in 2 days in Austin, Texas, exclusively in Clarksville, the neighborhood that hosts my home and my office. It was as if we built a movie studio lot within 1 square mile, utilizing my office as a production house, the warehouse across the parking lot as location number 1, and a home 3 blocks from mine as location number 2. A third location, an under construction space, belonged to a Ceremony client. Between setups, I was able to return home to eat my own food, bathe in my own bathtub, and walk Uni and Cookie between shooting locations. The short film is fine. It absolutely served its purpose to practice. It was likely one of very few types of films that could be created within these specific circumstances.
This is it. This is the material. 18 by 11 inch film. You can run that, right? Look, I gotta go. Or I can stay till you run a sample, or I can come back. I don't have much time on this, so we gotta get moving, we gotta get going. And I need to set a launch date, and for a launch date, I need chips in bags. So let's move it, let's keep the communication fluid, and call me when you have a deadline. 3 days. I'll see you in 3 days. Hey, thank you.
Once the time I took to reflect on the experience, I felt accomplished, having gone from crippling envy in March when watching Clint and Greg premiere their film to having made my first short film in 10 years, 2 months later. It's an experience I now treasure, and although I didn't know at the time, would become an exceptional piece of material to preview for actors, producers, and financiers for another project under development. I spent the summer of 2024 telling everyone that asked that I was making a feature film. My team and I designed a deck, pontificated on themes, and dreamed up talent for the roles I'd written. By this time, I'd involved McKenna Marshall. McKenna is sharp, connected, and despite being 7 years younger than me, more experienced in the art of getting films made. She was one of the first to read Guero, and both complimentary and critical of the material. It's not often that others are critical of me, at least not to my face. I walk around with an exterior confidence that acts as a veneer to cover the complex, haunted man underneath. I don't think McKenna saw through me. I think it's just in her nature to be critical, knowing that only the best can go from script to screen. With her notes, I worked on more rewrites to Guero, adding a pivotal scene halfway through the film where we learn publicly that our charming, thoughtful, lifelong friend to the protagonist is much more antagonist than aid. This is the role I wrote for myself, perhaps fittingly. July came and I spent an entire afternoon doing nothing in particular, scrolling through social media inside the home when the entire state of Montana was before me. Eventually, perhaps some hours in, I discovered a striking 30-something man named Drew Starkey. Drew spent several years on the kiddie soap opera Outer Banks and was preparing to make his indie darling debut in Luca Guadagnino's Queer, opposite Daniel Craig. I called McKenna immediately, believing we found our CW, the main character, for Guerrero. Of course, McKenna had a direct relationship with Drew's agent, and the script and an offer to play the leading Guerrero were with them a week later. Drafting an offer to an actor was something I'd never done before. I leaned heavily on McKenna for her expertise, as well as industry historical data to support the sum of money we presented Drew with. $300,000 for 25 days of work. Not a bad gig. Despite the evidence to support this figure as our opening offer, it felt like an arbitrary amount. The film's budget was still being determined, floating somewhere north of $2 million, and $300K was all the cash I had on hand, personally. Guerrero would require investor financing, and if packaged properly, with talent, some pre-sales by foreign territories. I don't know if this rule is written somewhere. Nonetheless, in the industry, when you make offers to talent to be in your film, you anticipate a 2-week decision-making window. And during this window, you're absolutely powerless. The only power you possess is to cross your fingers and everything else as hard as you possibly can. I was incredibly new to this, and I struggled. My greatest attributes are persistence and perseverance, neither of which apply to the period of time where you're waiting on an actor to associate with the role, the film, and the financial offer to participate in your project. I couldn't help myself and attempted to alert Drew to the offer through an Instagram direct message, undeterred by his 5 million followers and likely thousands of direct messages a day. After 2 weeks and no response to my hopeful message, Drew, through his agent, passed on playing CW and Guerrero. I was told he loved the material but didn't connect with the character. I'm not sure how to describe how I felt with our first offer being rejected. I was very far from discouraged, yet incredibly affected by Drew's inability to connect with the character, which was quite silly of me considering there is little chance he actually read the script. Whatever time I took to reflect on the belief that a character I wrote wouldn't connect with an up-and-coming 30-something male actor was too much time. I only wrote CW as some amalgamation of my father, my brothers, and myself, so I'm confident that any actor willing to take on this burden would desire some time to understand the connection between the written character and the moments of my upbringing that inspired this complexity. Therefore, the actor that would play CW would be anyone willing to have a conversation with me of the character's backstory. 4 months passed with 3 additional offers for CW sent, each one taking longer than the industry standard 2-week window of decision making. A few agents inquired a bit more about the production, the shooting schedule, and the financial status of the film, but no offer led to a conversation between myself and the actor we offer. Eventually, I did become discouraged. Naturally. Fortunately, still quite determined to exist in the world of feature filmmaking, I channeled my disappointment into an entirely different project altogether. Whether that's logical or not is up for debate, I suppose. However, it is intuitive to me, similar to how I've treated the various businesses I've started once they've stalled or faced considerable hardship. I quietly lost interest in the Guerrero film, the first film I wrote in 10 or more years, and the project intended to completely submerge myself in filmmaking and storytelling for good. The next film I wrote also drew from my life's inspiration, this time from my time in Mexico. A story much larger in scale, culture, and cinematic significance. And therefore, also in budget.
Mi amor, esta es la carta que no puede terminar. Viajar de un lugar al otro buscando. Llegué demasiado tarde, ya te había sido lo que me hizo pensar. ¿Quieres que te encontrar? Creo que el mundo es un lugar mejor cuando eres feliz. Así que le entrego esta carta al oceano. Espero que ella la lleve contigo. Gracias por amarme. Siempre te amaré.